All right.
You want to do the roll call, or I can do the roll call?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Commissioner Graham?
Here.
Present. Commissioner Hutton? Absent. Commissioner Skinner?
Here.
Commissioner Needham?
Here.
Commissioner, Councilmember Smith? Absent. Commissioner Slavic?
Here.
Commissioner Appel? Absent. Commissioner Gibrandal? Councilmember Bannister?
Here.
Commissioner Colowart? Chair Brown?
Here?
Commissioner Overpeck? Absent.
He was out sick.
And Commissioner Mursky?
Here.
Here. I believe you have a quorum.
Okay, great. So do you all have a copy of the agenda? Are there any, is there a motion to, does anybody want to add anything to the agenda or delete anything? Do I have a motion to accept it as written?
Yes, sir. So moved.
Second.
Okay, and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. We'll move to the minutes from our last meeting on December 5th. Are there any suggested amendments to the minutes as written? Okay, do I have a motion to accept the minutes? A second? Okay, second, Allison seconds. All who approve, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Sounds unanimous. Okay, now it's time for public commentary. If you wish to make a comment, please step up to the microphone and state your name. And, anybody? No? Okay. I guess not. So let's proceed, let's close the public commentary and go to unfinished business. Oh.
You know, your microphone isn't working well.
Oh, it isn't?
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
That's not it. But we didn't hear you closing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So,
Do public
so did you
commentary.
hear that I opened the floor for public commentary?
And we barely heard that.
Okay.
I'm going to tell them 3 minutes.
Yeah. So please state your name, and you have 3 minutes.
Is this on? Okay, my name's Elizabeth Noren. I'm a longtime resident of the city of Ann Arbor. And I would just like to say that any resolution that does not strongly phase out, if not completely ban, the use of a lot of the very, very, very toxic chemicals and toxic pesticides that are in use really is unconscionable. We cannot rely on our federal government. We can't rely on our state government. The EPA is dead. The city needs to take a stand, become the green city that it often proclaims to be, and replace turf grass with wildflowers and natural fauna that then the natural flora that then the pollinators and birds and all have a place to thrive. And there are some comments in some of the papers saying that, yes, it is true that some pesticides are toxic, but that these things are not in heavy use. And that is outright false. That's just totally false. And the city just really needs to step forward, show some courage, and do the right thing. And that's just the bottom line. As a resident, I expect this city to care about the health of our water, our air, our ground, and ourselves. And unless we move in this direction, we are not doing it. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Does anybody else wish to make a public comment? Okay, I guess we'll close the public comment period and move on to the unfinished business, which is a IPM resolution. I hear that there's a presentation. I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, is there a presentation?
We don't have a presentation, but we were just going to introduce it.
Oh, okay. So,
Come
yeah.
on up.
All right, so we have a copy of the resolution that was submitted by Ann Bannister a few days ago, I think. It's been updated repeatedly over the last couple of days, so I think, how many of you all have seen the updates? I think there was some emails going around. Okay. So,
I don't think they were on Legistar today.
okay. So let's see, do we have, any, let's see, there were handouts over here that represent one that's, may need amendment, probably needs some amendments. So, Ann, do you want to propose the amendments to the version that we've all been handed?
I am looking for it right now. So give me a minute, I guess.
Okay.
The
See,
two-
one of the complications is because of the Open Meetings Act, we have to publish, we have to post online the current, the document that we're going to be considering. So, so this just complicated things a little bit, but we'll get it done.
Well, I can,
Okay, all right. I wanted to start with the document that was circulating by email, I think yesterday, late yesterday and early today, which isn't the version that we have printed out here. So,
I'm sorry, Emily, you made some amendments to it, but it was never posted on?
I posted it about half an hour ago.
Oh, okay.
So it's up
So
on
is-
Legistar now, the version that you saw on my computer.
Okay, so is there a way for everyone to access it just on their computers right now? No. Even though it's on Legistar?
I can print up.
Okay,
I-
should we print out copies?
I can
before
print up the
begin,
copies.
or-
Yep, I will go to Legistar and print up copy.
Yeah, we don't have
Sorry.
I mean, in the interest of time, I can kind of start to introduce
Yes, why don't
it.
you introduce
Okay,
the
why don't
subject?
you introduce it?
So, because the edits made were kind of in the same vein as the overall thrust of this resolution. So first of all, my name is Alana Darigi. I'm here to introduce the resolution on your agenda tonight. Several different organizations have collaborated on this, including members of the Environmental Commission, members of the Parks Department, and members of our organization, which is called Pesticide Free Ann Arbor. So as Ann Arbor citizens, we appreciate all the work that Parks Department and NAP does to maintain beautiful and accessible parks and natural areas throughout the city, while at the same time minimizing the use of pesticides through their environmentally responsible integrated pest management program. And everybody who was here last month was able to see their presentation about kind of what they're doing to reduce pesticide use. And the Parks Department has also been able to reduce some turf grass areas by converting these areas into more natural grasslands, which use less water and don't require any chemicals to maintain, I think for the most part, except for in the case of invasive species. So we are also concerned about the continued maintenance of large areas of turf grass throughout the city and the use and overuse of harmful pesticides on these areas. A growing body of scientific evidence has shown the harmful effects certain pesticides have on people, pets, and critical insect populations. Some lawn chemicals like glyphosate have been linked to cancer and have been shown to harm developing fetuses. Others, like neonicotinoids, are linked to massive die-offs in honeybees and other pollinators. With these concerns in mind, we developed this resolution to help educate Ann Arbor residents about the Parks Department Integrated Pest Management Program and their best practices. The resolution asks the Parks Department to create materials to show how they've been able to reduce turf grass and maintain grass without the use of pesticides. These materials can then be distributed to property and business owners throughout the city. The resolution also asks the city to compile a list of property owners of large turf grass areas so that we can distribute these materials to individuals and businesses that could make the biggest impact if they were to reduce their turf grass and/or eliminate the use of pesticides. We join a growing number of municipalities, including Portland, Maine, and LA County, in looking for ways to reduce or even eliminate the use of certain pesticides. We believe it is in our community's best interest to act on what is known as the Precautionary Principle, which is that you don't wait for the chemical to be proven harmful before you act. So like in the EU, for example, you have to prove that the chemical is safe. Instead of, here in the US, we kind of wait until there's enough cases of certain diseases and then we act. So we believe it is simply too soon to tell whether many of the over 85,000 different chemicals registered by the EPA are actually safe. As in the case of PFAS, we were told these chemicals were safe only to learn too late that they're actually posing a great risk to our drinking water. We believe the same will most likely be shown to be true for many of these pesticides. And so we believe that we need to take a stronger stance against the use of chemicals. And a way to do that as well is to just reduce turf grass in general that requires pesticides. So this is kind of a two-pronged resolution that asks Parks Department to help us educate the city about how we can both reduce large turf grass areas and reduce the use of chemicals on these areas. So we thank you very much for all your time and consideration and for the members who worked closely with us on this. And we would love to answer any questions or kind of help flesh this out as we decide how to proceed. So, thank you.
All right, well, thank you.
It's not on the register either.
So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I guess we should do a reading.
Yeah.
$1.4.
You want to read it right off of the screen?
Why not? I can do that.
There you go. Or do you want me to read it? Doesn't
Oh,
matter.
no.
Okay.
So, while Ann's making a printed copy, I can read out the resolution. I think there's the title in the memorandum, I don't believe it changed.
There was a typo in the title that I just took out the word of.
Yeah, okay. So the changes were made in the, in the body of the resolution itself, my understanding is. So this is the most recent version we have, so I'm going to read it out to everybody. Whereas the City of Ann Arbor's sustainability framework contains the Healthy Ecosystems goal to conserve, protect, enhance, and restore our aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems, and whereas the Ann Arbor City Council designated Ann Arbor as a Bee City USA and is committed to working towards a pollinator-friendly community with the creation of a pollinator subcommittee. Whereas to that end, the Natural Area Preservation and Parks Department have adopted an environmentally responsible integrated pest management program that reduces both pests and pesticide risks by incorporating low-risk control options. And whereas the City of Ann Arbor wishes to promote land care practices that minimize the need to apply pesticides to control unwanted pests, and whereas large areas of turf grass throughout the city continue to be treated by property owners with harmful pesticides, and whereas the use of pesticides has been known or suspected to cause harm to people, pets, and pollinators, and is not necessary to grow and maintain green lawns and ornamental landscapes, given the availability of viable alternative practices and products, and whereas the maintenance of turf grass on large areas throughout the city requires excessive water and energy and is inconsistent with the city's sustainability framework goal of maintaining healthy ecosystems and appropriate stewardship of our natural resources. Be it resolved that the Environmental Commission urges the city to compile educational material about current Parks Department integrated pest management, IPM, best practices, and circulate these materials in the community. Resolved that the Environmental Commission urges the city to identify owners of large turf grass property, that's defined as 1 acre in size or larger, for the purpose of outreach and education. Resolved that the Environmental Commission urges the city to examine the possibility of implementing a certification program for chemical-free lawns that meet the standards set forth by the Parks Department IPM. And resolved that the Environmental Commission urges the city to encourage residents, business owners, and especially entities with large property holdings to not only use IPM, but also reduce turf grass and replace it with diverse natural plantings. Okay. So that's the resolution as it's been prepared so far. Is that correct, Chris? Yeah, thanks for making the copies, Ann.
Yep.
This will make it easier for us all to write notes.
Mhm.
Okay, let me just back.
Yeah, thank you.
So, okay. Let's open
I think it needs to be introduced and seconded, and then we can have discussion, right?
Sorry.
Someone needs to introduce the resolution, it needs to be seconded, and then can be discussed.
Yeah. And again, would you like to introduce it?
Okay, yes.
Okay. Is it seconded?
She makes the motion.
Second.
Okay, shall we take it up for discussion? Carol, you say aye?
Yep.
Any nays? Okay. So, let's see, Ann, do you or Chris want to start off the discussion, or Katie?
Well, I have a question. Do we have a statement from Parks about this? You know, usually when we're resolving something that has to do with solid waste, that has to do with energy, that has to do with public works, we hear from those folks. I'm wondering if we've got a statement from them in support of this resolution.
I'd like to call on Alana.
Yeah, let's call on Alana, yeah.
To answer that question.
Alana?
We don't have a statement from them, but we were in a meeting with several of with Colin Smith and Dave Borneman. Was there another person there from the Parks Department too? Yeah, and I've spoken with Scott Spooner. And so they helped us to kind of draft this, we talked directly with them, like what would it take, how many man-hours would it take for you to kind of do this type of project, and they were amenable to it being, like, if it were, if they were directed to by city council, kind of the way it runs down the, like, the work chain,
through the
that they
process.
would be able to accommodate this. But we don't have an official statement from them, so.
I have a brief, go ahead, Bob.
I just wanted to offer a hopefully friendly amendment to the resolution, which I think is great. I would like to suggest as the second resolved clause, just in addition saying resolved that the city adopts and follows these IPM best practices on all city-owned properties. I think it's great that Parks is doing them, but there are an awful lot of city-owned properties that Parks does not control, and I think these practices would be good for all of them.
All right, that would be in the first resolve clause.
I would make it a second resolved clause.
Okay.
Do you mind passing down the text or reading it out loud again?
Sure. Resolved that the city adopts and follows these IPM best practices on all city-owned properties.
Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah, I remember that being part of the discussion during their presentation. Yeah, that they don't maintain several of the city-owned properties.
I have a couple of brief comments. I was involved in some of the email exchanges leading up to the final version of the resolution. I appreciate the changes. One thing that I'd like to put out there for discussion is the possibility of striking references specifically to City of Ann Arbor best practices. I'm sure to some degree, or maybe even to a large degree, the city's best practices are based on what they've done in terms of looking at what other entities have done so far. But my sense is that it would be worthwhile in creating materials for outreach that we just simply provide best practices, period, whether they come from the City of Ann Arbor, whether they come from NAP, whether they come from local or other landscaping, landscape architecture companies, botanists, whatever. And there may be some really good material that we can get from someplace else in the country, photographs, case studies, et cetera. So my proposal would be a friendly amendment that in the title, we just simply say materials about integrated pest management best practices and cross out NAP, turf grass reduction strategies. And then in the resolution itself, let's see, I wrote it on the other one. In the first resolved statement, basically the same thing. resolved, and then strike current Parks Department integrated, or just current Parks Department. So it about integrated pest management best practices and circulate these materials. And I think everything else can remain the same, including Commissioner Needham's friendly amendment. I don't know if there's any comment from any commissioner or from the audience about that proposal.
I think you want to get a second for these amendments.
Yeah.
Then you can vote on the amendments. And I would do it in order.
Do you want to do them each one at a time?
I think one at a time is easiest.
Yeah, that's probably easier. Okay, so we've had the first amendment suggested by Bob Needham. Is there any further discussion on that amendment before we vote on it? All who approve adding this amendment to the...
We're speaking of Commissioner Needham's, correct?
Needham's
Okay.
comment, yeah. Any, do I have a vote? All who approve of adding Bob Needham's amendment, which was just suggesting that the city adopt these practices on all city-owned properties, not just those that the city is maintaining themselves. So, all who approve, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain.
Okay. So then the second proposed amendment that was advanced by John Mursky on a title change.
Striking current Parks Department and NAP in the title, and then striking current Parks Department in the first resolve clause, which makes it basically neutral. Doesn't mean that the recommendations can't be based on current best practices, but it opens up the door to looking elsewhere.
But there has to be some authority for whoever issues them.
Well,
So,
the city is tasked with doing this.
Mhm.
So the task remains the same, and the task is not now, according to my proposal, wouldn't be just to simply pick up, I mean, they could choose to do it, just pick up what they have right now and use those, but it opens the door to looking elsewhere,
Mhm.
and including those in outreach materials and education, et cetera.
Any comments?
Just so you all know, I have a dog in this fight, so to speak. I do lawn reduction and environmental restoration as part of my work, so I, just full disclosure here, will not be voting on anything that encourages the city to promote this.
Okay,
So.
all right, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mike. So, yeah, I don't see any objection, I don't have any objection to that change myself. I don't see any complications that would arise because of that.
I saw some, Rita, did you have an addition?
No,
Just a question.
Can you come up to the podium,
come up
please?
to the podium.
Hi, I'm Rita Mitchell. I'm one of the co-founders of Be Safe Ann Arbor, and I'm also part of Pesticide Free Ann Arbor. And a question I have is, if you're expanding the use of these practices, which I think is a great one, to all of the city departments, is there a responsible, will the process be transferred from Parks to another department as opposed to having Parks responsible for managing all of the city properties? Is that something that you all need to consider?
I mean, my thinking in bringing the amendment was that the parks would share their information with the other departments. and,
Right, okay. I just want to be sure
I-
that we don't put a load on Parks that is not
Right.
helpful to them. At the same time, I truly appreciate your suggestion in that amendment.
I think it's,
I
you know,
concur with Commissioners Needham's. I mean, if I were to read that, I would interpret it the same way, that all we're asking is that the same practices be applied on all properties, and it's up to whichever entity is responsible for maintaining those to apply those practices. So it's no additional burden on parks. It's just that those practices would be applied uniformly across all properties, not just on parks and natural areas.
I just thought maybe it would be good to be explicit about that.
If I can jump in real quick, I think the city administrator would be the one who would be responsible for figuring out which department for implementation for this. So I wouldn't think you would necessarily need to add that into the resolution. It just is assumed that if city council instructs the city administrator and the city staff to do something, he'll be the one to sort of figure out who's going to do it best.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Yep,
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks, Emily.
sure.
So, well, why don't we, is there any more discussion about the amendment proposed by Commissioner Mursky? Okay, well, all who approve of the amendment, say aye.
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 Any, one abstention? And any nays? Okay, then it passes. All right.
So do we need to vote on the entire
Yeah, we need to
resolution?
vote
Yep.
on the entire
And
thing.
Chris
But
had
we
some-
also
Do we have
may
a-
have some other
oh,
amendments.
okay,
We're
good.
going- We go through the amendments one by one.
Okay, good.
Proposals.
So I apologize for missing the meeting when this is hammered out. And secondly, I was not working today with the current resolution. I don't know how I missed that also, but I did.
Be sure you're close to the mic.
And the weeds are a bit complicated. Whereas number 4, whereas the city of Ann Arbor wishes to promote lawn care practices, since most of this resolution is talking about lawns, grass, not the wider discussion on dealing with pests and trees, et cetera. Whereas large areas of turf grass throughout the city continue to be treated by property owners with harmful pesticides. I don't think that's an accurate statement, or more importantly, it's not one that's likely to be accepted by the many businesses that serve our community who don't think they're putting harmful pesticides on grass. And it's not just large areas. These pesticides, if you don't like them, are being put on small grass areas, much less than an acre, primarily. It's not the size of the grass areas on which pesticides are being placed. It's that we have way too much grass which is out there for looks and not function. And so I might amend that. That one was there before. To,
So are you, on the fifth whereas, are you proposing that we
Yes.
strike large areas, whereas turf grass throughout the city continues?
I would change it entirely to a different thrust. Whereas it is evident that many areas of lawn across the city could be greatly reduced in size, resulting in very considerable cost savings in water use, in fossil fuel use, and in the use of pesticides. That doesn't step on people's toes, and it does where we really want to go, which is a sustainability goal. The resources we spend on grass that's really not needed for recreational purposes in Ann Arbor is ridiculous. And we can get rid of the pesticides at the same time we get rid of grass.
So, let's see, so we're thinking about amending the fifth whereas statement? Large
Yeah.
areas of turf grass, or would
Yeah.
you like to strike that and propose an alternative?
I would suggest that strongly.
Do you mind passing that down if you're, or do you have others?
I have
Commissioner Green?
others, but you can do that one first if you like. And I
We could do all of yours together, as long
Well,
as there's.
I need to adjust my, to fit the resolution I haven't seen, so let me have the time while you work on this one.
All right.
Do you mind passing it down so I can work on that one?
Could we,
I have a copy of the edits that you sent, if you mind if I skip them to
Yeah,
Oh, that'd be
please.
great. Thank you.
this is, like, I just added it.
Okay.
So that's like, instead of
Okay, great, thank you.
So, sorry, should I go on, or do you want to deal with the fifth one first? Clause 5 first.
yeah, let's give Emily a chance to type it in.
Oh, no, you don't have to wait for me.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, what's the next,
So, clause 6 has changed since the one I saw. And there are more that weren't there before, most of which are fine, I think, except for the 1 acre in size, constrained in clause 9, resolved. I think we need to apply this everywhere, to everyone, and really work with the applicators that work in the city, and somehow with homeowners to agree on what best management practices and good integrated pest management procedures would be. What works for parks is not going to be very good for people that want green lawns with no weeds. Because a lot of the park's grass areas have a lot of dandelions and a lot of other invasive weeds in them. And you can't, short of pulling them by hand in a much more expensive procedure, get them out. So there needs to be a process, not that the city decides, but that we work with especially with the applicators, because they know a lot more than homeowners do. How do we get them all to subscribe to an agreeable course of action that has them advocating to their clients a routine that minimizes the use of pesticides and fertilizers? And that's a little different from what this language says. And so I'm sorry, we're getting into the weeds where I haven't even figured out the wording yet.
I have a proposal, and I hope this is acceptable to everybody. I don't think that we should be rewriting and recrafting a resolution
Yeah.
during a meeting.
Right.
I think my perception is that this resolution has broad support among the commission. I believe some of the ideas that Commissioner Graham proposed be added also strengthen it and would also be supported by the commission. And so my recommendation would be that we table this, that we work to incorporate Commissioner Needham's and my amendments, also those that are being contemplated by Commissioner Graham. Maybe there's some additional insights that also happen in the community now that we've discussed this, and we take that input and then have something that's a final draft for consideration by the commission in the next meeting.
Well, it is difficult to go through a lot of this in the time that's allocated to us now. But, it seems to me that it's always it's always difficult to try to capture more and more detail and more specifics. I think part of a resolution such as this, I would imagine, is just to set broad policy broad policy points and not get too much into the individual details. So I agree with the sentiment myself, but I'm wondering, we've already spent and many months, I think, going over this in different meetings. So I'm hoping that maybe we can resolve it at this meeting. I don't know,
I agree that, I think the idea is to develop a positive approach in the city to building sustainable practices around pesticides use. And I have other things to say, but go ahead, Councilwoman.
Well, I was just going to agree with Chair Brown, that I know it isn't optimal to be making these amendments as we are, but we did get a flood of good ideas just in this week. And the concern is that if we postpone to our February 27 meeting, we are maybe getting too close to getting the word out and missing the 2020 season. So that would be in favor then of pressing through tonight, and then even Commissioner Graham's suggestions could maybe be added in the process, like for the council resolution. At that time, could be added as an amendment then. It wouldn't be the pure Environmental Commission original one from today if we pass this today, but we could still get those in, perhaps.
I might like to just suggest that since the focus of this seems to be on large turf grass areas, most areas of turf grass in the city that are over an acre are also going to be professionally managed. By bringing in a professional lawn manager, who I am not, you might be able to get some ideas about low-hanging fruit for pesticide reduction. I would say it is far better to come late to the 2020 season with a great idea than to forge ahead with something that, as Chris mentioned in his email, might offend people or might just seem out in left field and seem unattainable. I think the opportunity would be to make better policy than speedy policy on this. That's my 2 cents from somebody who's going to abstain from the vote anyway.
Okay.
Can I say something? I think that this resolution is broad enough that it can be tailored, and if we reactivate this pollinators working group, this is something that they can work on with the city and talk to professionals, talk to maybe some large rental companies and large property owners. And this is an opportunity for the pollinator working group to help the city do something that they might not otherwise have the resources to do. But I think that this is a broad enough resolution, and it gets us going in the right direction.
I have a question of Councilmember Bannister. If we adopt this as is, do you still have the opportunity to take this to council with minor revisions? I mean, this doesn't, you can say that we passed a revision, a resolution, and say that there was additional input that was taken and included in the resolution that's now before you, and then council can pass that without having to wait a month and then another 2 or 4 weeks after that for council to consider it.
Yes, I think that that would not be out of order to do it that as you described.
So that would be a compromise. That means we could vote on something tonight knowing it's 90% of what we want, knowing there's a couple of concerns potentially that Commissioner Graham has, those could be worked on with Councilmember Bannister and some other representatives in the community, and that could be done within the next couple of weeks, and then a final or a revised version of this could be brought and introduced by Councilmember Bannister to in a council meeting, and that way we hopefully cover all of the points.
Yeah, to me, that sounds like a reasonable compromise. I mean, if Chris and Ann and Katie can work on it together. Okay?
Well, not just us two, but yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, not just you, yeah.
Alana, go ahead.
Alana?
Yep.
You can come up.
Yeah, so to address Commissioner Apple and Graham, so I think it's I guess your concerns seem kind of like a separate, maybe like a separate issue, the idea of like working with applicators or working with professional management companies. I mean, these are companies that their whole business model is selling pesticides. So I think that's a little bit at odds with our idea, which is using something that the Parks Department created because they don't have a vested interest in selling pesticides. And so by using their model and bringing it straight to, property management companies, you can save water, you can save money. You don't have to go through pesticide companies or, lawn care companies that are beholden to pesticide companies in order to get the kind of lawns that I think people in Ann Arbor actually want, and I think it does take a little bit of culture change. I agree that it's not going to be a pristine lawn that you're used to, but I think when presented with the facts of kind of the give and take of like, do I want these chemicals or do I want a few dandelions, I think that a lot of Ann Arbor residents do want to be able to make that choice. So that is what I would say about those kinds of objections. Thank you.
There's a big outreach and education component to this resolution.
Has to be.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that takes a bit of offense to your comment.
Yeah.
As the person who is, as Chris may also be, as a licensed pesticide applicator. But not so much that, because we don't do this to sell the pesticide applications. We do this to be able to get a certain job done. In my case, it is, exotic invasive species control.
Yeah.
I spent the first 10 years of my career doing organic invasive species management, and all of those places took another decade of work to be able to go back and actually finish the work. There were not organic techniques that worked to be able to get that job done. So I changed my mind and my approach to be able to use tools that would actually work to restore the earth.
And we definitely heard that from Parks as well, which is why we did
Oh,
not.
Alana, you need to come up.
We
Sorry.
heard those concerns from the Parks Department as well, and NAP as well, and so this is not about invasive species. So we just want to talk, like, this is about lawns. This is like when you drive down Packard and you see, the ponds at Georgetown or whatever that big apartment complex is, and you just see lawn and lawn and lawn, and you see the little sign that says pesticides have been applied here. So these are, the point of this is a kind of low-hanging fruit of like, this is just a huge swath of land by the roadside. There isn't anything native growing there. It's not necessarily an invasive species, it's just turf grass. And is there a way to kind of keep them from just spraying, right there on the huge area of lawn? So that's kind of how we developed this, is like, what would be the most effective, the most, like someone mentioned, low-hanging fruit. And we work closely with Shannon Gibb Randall as well. Got her buy-in, and so I just think that maybe there's some confusion about like what we're targeting. We're not targeting pesticide applicators who are working on invasive species. This is more like True Green comes to your neighborhood. Is that?
And like I
That's
say,
kind of what
I
we're
think
targeting.
if you sort of increase your outreach to be able to look at the broad swath of lawn care companies that are out there, there are many that are out there that are not trying to sell yet another chemical application process.
Yeah.
And that's where
Yeah.
I would encourage you to get out of your own silo here and start to look a little bit more broadly at the full spectrum of what people are trying to do in terms of caring for their property.
I just think I mean, with all due respect, I think you're fundamentally misunderstanding what we're trying to do here, and that we reached out to you several times and asked for your input, so for you to come back now and say that this is, hasty policy instead of good policy, it's just, it's like kind of difficult to hear that now when we would have appreciated your input earlier. Also, I just think this is not, I think we're talking apples and oranges, and I mean, it would be great to have the opportunity to like hash this out more in a separate meeting, I guess, but I think this does have the broad strokes that we want in order just to get more education out to the community about certain types of harmful pesticides that maybe people don't actually want on their lawns. So.
No, we don't. I know this is all very unusual. Well, Chris?
This is difficult. It's delicate. The state has been protecting lawn care companies quite deliberately. They do not want those businesses banned. We are not able to go from where we are now to a policy in Ann Arbor that says we shall not permit pesticides to be put on lawns in this city. We're not able to do that.
But that's not what this says.
It is not what this says, but the motivation behind some of the language here seems to me to be saying that. And what some of the suggestions I made was to soften that portion of the language that stepped on those toes, and to try to instigate not just Parks Department policy, which is not going to be satisfactory to the many people in Ann Arbor that want bright green grass with no weeds, and include the people who really understand what they're doing out there with these things, bring them to the table, and devise a policy for Ann Arbor that minimizes the use of these pesticides. They're not going away. Secondly, and more importantly, I believe we can make far more progress on that subject as well as the larger sustainability subject if we really focus our efforts on getting people to get rid of so much turf grass, period.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
And that's not here.
No, it is. That's the last resolve.
Oh, wait a second.
Or it's
Wait
getting
a
there.
second. I mean, our bylaws, well, I'm not sure it's our bylaws, but we have to restrict public commentary to the public comment period, but I appreciate what you said, because you've played an active role in drafting this resolution. So,
I'm happy to go forward tonight with it. Again, the general perspective that we would like to have less pesticide use in Ann Arbor and less turf grass in Ann Arbor is a good one. It's a great one,
right.
no doubt about it.
No, I mean, I would agree, but, and this resolution, as it's written now, seems to embody like that spirit, and it is difficult getting through all of the legal ramifications here, and all the practical things as well, so.
So I was just whispering with Bob here, and a question that I would have then is, would this receive broader support if we, or is it getting into maybe more difficulties if we just eliminate all references to large? He just crossed out when I was just whispering with Bob here, large in resolved clause number 6, that's the last one, which would also then mean in resolved clause number 5, we would cross out large areas of, and it would just say, whereas turf grass throughout the city, and have to add S2 continues. In resolved clause number 2, we would cross out large, and we would also cross out 1 acre in size or larger, and then we would cross out large in the last resolve clause. And none of this is dictating anything, so we're just basically asking that there's outreach and education to the community as a whole. I think obviously in the implementation of this, the first phase can be targeted according to the 80-20 rule, the 20% of properties that maybe have the 80% of impact, the same things with applicators, et cetera. So it still leaves a lot of room open for how this is then finally implemented. But what it does is we move with this, it gets in front of council, and it gives an opportunity for this to get out into the community, as Council Member Bannister said, before the 2020 season.
Yeah.
What do people think of that? And if that sounds reasonable, then I'll formalize it with another friendly amendment.
To me, that seems reasonable, and I'm reading this as an education and outreach effort, and that fits with that, and so I would support that.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'll repeat it. Emily, do I need to repeat it, or did you get it?
sure do.
So in resolve clause number 5, we would say, whereas turf grass throughout the city continues to be treated by property owners with harmful pesticides, and we would strike large areas of. In resolved clause number 2, we would strike the word large after the city urges the city to identify owners of turf grass property. It's probably most of us, but it would just strike out large, and strike out 1 acre in size or larger. So it basically then applies citywide. And then finally, in the last resolved clause, strikes the word large. Well, actually, I guess we would strike out encourages residents, and then we'd have to have and business owners, and then strike out and especially entities with large property holdings. And it would simply say then, resolve the Environmental Commission urges the city to encourage residents and business owners to not only use IPM, but also reduce turf grass and replace it with diverse natural plantings. I think that's the message we want to send. Not prescriptive, outreach and educational. It allows us to implement this in a targeted way, and it allows us to do it in time for 2020.
Do you mind passing down your proposed amendment?
Not at all.
Thank you.
That gets me shut up because I won't be able to refer to anything anymore.
Okay.
Very good.
Any other ideas in this realm?
Thank you. Sorry about the weeds.
We got to the
Well,
right place.
I'm pretty happy with all this.
Call a question.
Okay.
We have
You
to do
had,
this in-
Maybe you got it right
Christopher, you have Commissioner Graham's amendment, a couple of amendments in there. Do you want to pull
One
those back?
only, I think, and then John's. The one only was changing land, the word land in clause 4 to lawn,
Okay.
and then otherwise John's.
Okay, but I also have you deleting, I think it's the 6th whereas clause, large areas of turf grass, that one. And then I had you
Right.
adding,
That's-
We changed that though now.
So there were 2.
well, and then you added another whereas clause, talking about savings in water use, fossil fuel use, and the use of pesticides. And then I thought you were going to be deleting the following whereas clause, the use of pesticides has been known or suspected to. So,
You're right.
I like the one that he added.
So I substituted a new one for clause 5. Other than changing land to lawn in clause 4. Substituting whereas it is evident that many areas of lawn across the city could be greatly reduced, resulting in very considerable cost savings in water use, fossil fuel use, mowing, et cetera, and the use of pesticides.
And then you added, whereas the use of pesticides has been, oh, you deleted the following one? About the use of pesticides has been known to or suspected?
I didn't think that one changed at all.
It didn't? Okay.
It's different than it was in the notes I was making to people, so I won't pursue that.
Okay.
So, Chris, do you and Emily understand each other? Do we
I
all
think so.
understand it? Okay.
I'll send, you have my copy too, Emily?
I believe I do have your copy. Would you like it back?
Nope.
Okay. So then maybe, yeah, take a vote on
Okay.
grants.
So, is there any discussion about the amendment as proposed? Should we read it?
I like that amendment in the positive approach. That sort of says the same thing, but said it in the reason why we're doing it instead of just harmful pesticide, if that's a negative or offensive word.
Okay, let's see. I mean, I'll just say that I think this just underscores the need to maybe have this all done, well before the meeting and have the final version submitted at least like 3 or 4 days before the meeting so that this doesn't happen as a regular course of practice, just from a practical point of view. And that, and we'll never be able to come up with something that's totally comprehensive here, but I think this is a great first approach, to encouraging the city to do some outreach and education on minimizing turf grass as well as not spreading as being very considerate in the pesticides that you're using. Okay? So is there any further discussion on this resolution?
Amendment, you have to get.
Or the
Chris's.
amendment, yeah, we haven't done the
Vote.
amendment yet. So if there's no further discussion on the amendment, do I have a vote to approve this resolution as amended?
Aye.
Second. All who approve?
Aye.
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 And
Abstain.
One abstention. Okay. All right, so it passes almost unanimously. Okay. So, let's see, let's move on. The next item on the agenda.
You didn't do the
We need to
whole-
vote on the whole thing.
Oh,
thing.
I'm sorry.
We have to do general.
So, do we have any more discussion on the whole resolution? Anybody?
I think you've all done a lovely job in terms of making this seem less antagonistic. Most large lawn owners seem very attached to it, and writing a proposal that introduces that there are alternatives seems to be a better use of city time, I would say, than telling them how wrong they are, because it seems to me that that's a sure way to not get very far, and I hope you will accept that as, you catch a lot more flies with honey than with vinegar in this
Yeah,
instance.
in my experience, yeah.
I also think that the certification program would be a great idea to reward people for good behavior rather than punish people for.
Yeah, we should always have carrots, not just sticks. And I would agree, and I think this is a good opportunity for the pollinator subcommittee to engage with property owners that have large turf areas and do some personal outreach in that regard. Yeah? Okay. So, let's see. Do I have a motion to accept this resolution?
You already
as
have
writ-
it.
As amended, yeah.
Yep,
And a second.
Councilmember Bannister and a second
Yeah,
by,
Slavik, okay. Okay, all who approve of this resolution as amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any, one abstention? Okay. So it passes, it's passed as amended. Okay, well, there's been a lot of work put into this, and I think, I hope we can all be happy with it. But there's certainly a lot more work to be done. So so now let's go on to new business. The next item is Workgroup Goals for 2020. I'll begin as the lead on the Environmental Commission Solid Waste Working Group. During the past year, we've been done quite a lot of work around the SWRMP process that the city was was updating its strategic plan for dealing with solid waste. And then there was a lot of discussion about the MRF and things like that. So one of our SMART goals for the year was to do propose metrics for the city's solid waste management elements of the sustainability dashboard. As you all know, the city's had a sustainability dashboard for since 2013, I believe, and there are metrics in there, but they have not been updated regularly, and there's some confusion about how they're calculated. So part of what we wanted to do is to propose metrics going forward for the sustainability dashboard to be updated quarterly. And so this is what I handed out. There are some spare copies up here if anyone in the audience would like to see them, but I've handed these out. So the proposed metrics are material flow in tons by both sector, residential and commercial, and by waste stream. And the grand total of the material flow to landfill tracks progress to its long-term zero waste goals of the city.
I have a question. Do you want me to wait until the end, though?
Sure.
I'm just not sure how we can track construction and demolition waste. Last time I looked into it, there's not a way, unless we do like a permitting thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's really, I'm not sure if anybody really wants me to read through all of these. They're all distributed. But let me just say that the working group is meeting with city staff regularly, once a month, to refine these. And also, it's a bit complicated because of the city's 820 initiative. There is a technical advisory committee that's working with materials, which it will also be suggesting different metrics and goals for 2020. So in the area of solid waste, there's a number of players here, not just the Environmental Commission, that have recently been engaging. There's a new city solid waste manager named Eileen Naples, who's just getting up to speed. And so construction and demolition were part of that discussion earlier today. The city already we're discussing whether, quite a bit of the asphalt in the city is recycled. You've seen the trucks that grind it up and then take it off for processing and bring it back for new roads. So definitely some of the major areas here are trying to account for construction and demolition waste.
If I may weigh in briefly, or sorry, Steve, did you want to finish your thought?
No, that's it.
So we're not voting on anything. This is not in the form of a resolution. This is just a set of recommendations to the city, specifically to the solid waste question. The solid waste resource management plan proposal that's still in front of council was tabled, includes an element where C&D, construction and demolition waste, would start to be reviewed and analyzed and hopefully captured. And that would lead to a metric like what's mentioned here. So we recognize some of these things may not be able to be done immediately. I'd also add, we haven't really talked about which of these would actually be posted on the sustainability dashboard. Some of these may be indicators that are sort of in the background, and maybe only one or two of these would actually be on the dashboard. But the proposal is that the the city would be using all of these to not only track outcomes and results for the city, for example, diversion rate, but also looking at some of these other things that might also help them do things like optimize costs, improve customer satisfaction, and things like that.
Yeah.
So,
And this calculation of greenhouse gas emissions that are involved with recycling and landfilling,
Yeah.
things like that. So all I really wanted to say is that we've been working on these proposed metrics. We have a list here, a preliminary list, and I think our major goal for this work group for the next year is to work with city staff, flesh it out a little bit more, you know, and make it consistent with the zero waste goal, long-term goal for the city as it's being defined by the A20 process. Are there any questions? There's nothing to act on this tonight.
No, it's just a personal experience that I had that I've already brought up with the new solid waste coordinator about microplastics and in the city mulch. I got a very bad batch of mulch over the course of the summer and proceeded to inquire if we have any standards for what makes mulch okay to sell, or what makes it need to be converted to waste energy or sent to a landfill. Because certainly I am not enjoying picking up what I need to out there right now, and I'm one of the few people that would actually get out there and do that. And certainly I would hate to be somebody who would sell that to somebody as a service, as I imagine many landscape companies in town do. I haven't heard back yet if there is a standard in the contract currently for how they are measuring, assessing, and reporting on microplastics in the mulch. But I will mention that to those of you that are on the Solid Waste Committee in the hopes that you can keep this discussion going over time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
I've experienced the same thing,
Yeah.
so duly
So-
noted.
Are you talking about remnants of plastic bags or microplastics?
I guess they'd be macroplastics in this
Okay,
case.
yeah.
Because
Can be
you
terrible.
can see them. Yeah, plastic bags, a lot of polyethylene films, but also a lot of plant containers and a lot of plant tags, pieces of edging.
How big, Mike?
Flags, gas flags with the plastic
Right.
sticks.
How big? The whole flag?
No, usually they're,
Chunks of.
they're chopped up. So I wish they were the whole flags. They'd be a lot easier to pick up and find that way. But
So the question is, are they screening as well as they have been traditionally?
I may have gotten the end of the screening. I think they are screening all the time, and I think this is a problem that they have all the time. I may have just been the lucky person who got the end of the pile as opposed to the beginning of the pile. So yeah, I put that out there. I don't know if it's in the contract, but we do contract with Denali to be able to, or what is it? We Care Organics now. And I don't know if there's anything in that contract that says, plastics in mulch shall not exceed X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good point. Anything else about solid waste issues that people want to flag? Okay. I think, and then the other issue that's come up is the regionalization of solid waste management through the WRMMA process. So I think it would be, I think the commission should be paying attention to what can be done to get Ann Arbor engaged with this process. So I don't know, do you have anything, any new information about that, Ann?
Not other than Howard Lazarus, the city administrator, did attend the Washtenaw Regional Resource Management Authority meeting on December 16, and they were, the group there, the members of the WRMA expressed hope that the city would join, and but they weren't interested at this time in revising their proportional voting or their, to make Ann Arbor more of a larger vote, given the size of the population that we represent. And they weren't necessarily interested in the employee protections that, that we do here in Ann Arbor with responsible contractor language and so forth. So I was encouraging Mr. Lazarus to continue to attend their meetings or send a representative from city staff to attend their meetings and continue to work with them. And their main focus, according to Mr. Lazarus, was policy and education this year. So I think there's still time. Oh, the third issue about whether or not municipalities and other cities can bring their recycles to our MRF. Whether that, apparently that does not require a WRMA-style agreement, that those other, groups could come to us anyway. It doesn't, the WRMA, with or without WRMA, does not preclude it. And so the issue of them bringing contaminated recyclables to us can and should be addressed anyway, in any case.
Okay. All right, well, thank you.
Yeah. I did have one other update, though. This may or may not be the time, but in regards to our food gatherers resolution that we had passed.
Right now, we're on the, let's see, how about till we wait for the reports from council?
Sure.
Okay? So I think that's all I have to say for the solid waste work group. If there's no more questions, let's move on to or Chris,
Natural features?
natural features.
So you all asked that we develop an agenda for our committee for 2020. And I sent it to some of you, and I just emailed it to more of you. There are 5 things, none of which are easy, needless to say. Develop and seek heritage tree amendments to Chapter 55 or the Universal Development Code or our body of development ordinances. And that would probably mean expanding upon the landmark tree list to include heritage trees, which are trees probably of at least a larger size, if not other criterion. Second, develop and seek tree protection amendments in Chapter 55 for trees not already regulated in the site development process. We're losing a lot of trees in the city on single and two-family properties that have building projects, tear downs, rebuilding projects, or completely new subdivisions, such as happened on Packard in a single-family zone. And there are some, I think, certainly a majority of council members who really want to regulate that big hole in our regulations. We'll help with amendments which are ready for floodplain provisions in Chapter 55. They promise to be, if I'm hearing Jerry Hancock correctly, quite interesting and maybe a little controversial, but I hope by now not. Develop sustainable landscape outreach model for 2 neighborhoods, one with a significant chunk of native forest fragment, and one, hopefully nearby, that was farm field in our history, where the native forest flora seed was destroyed in farming. And 5th, a seeking concerted effort by the city to accomplish an early update to the city's GIS woodland maps, which date back to 1990. And we have green polygons on our woodland map from 1990 that don't distinguish between a buckthorn thicket and a high-quality native forest fragment. That's the best we have.
Okay.
And this will take a chunk of money to accomplish. Hopefully Ann's put her oar in the water about that in the budget, and it probably requires a consultant who has the capability to fly probably more than once, and this time, unlike our normal procedures to fly for stormwater impervious surface efforts, flying during leaf on at maybe 3 times in a year, so that we can get different reflectivity from leaves and be able to distinguish different, at least communities, from different reflectivity in the leaf, different colors of green essentially. And it would require a consultant who's able to do the computer processing and interpretation and field checking to rectify multiple images and make them read across the city. All of that's normal procedure, it's just a different time of year with a different set of goals from what we normally do. That's our 5 things. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Chris. So let's see, Susan's not here today, so she was the head of the water and water quality and stormwater management group, so we'll wait for that. We'll wait till the next meeting for that one. Let's see, so the overall commission goals for 2020, I think they're embodied right now within these work group goals, because those are the work groups that were set up last year. Are there any other work groups that are proposed to be?
Yeah, we would like to, I would like to reactivate the pollinator work group. Pollinator, it used to be pollinator subcommittee, now be a working group. Yep.
Okay,
Very good.
so feel free to recruit wherever you want.
And we'll come up with our goals.
I'll just
Our
remind you
agenda.
that, yeah, last time I read the bylaws of the commission, I think it's only required to have one person on them. We can have work groups, and it's only required to have one commissioner on that work group. So, okay,
I
great.
think we have some people in the audience that we can recruit.
Yeah, I think so. So are there any, does anybody wish to make a comment on commission goals for 2020? Or suggest any additional goals besides what have been mentioned so far? Okay, so let's see, we had an item on the agenda for metrics discussion. I know for myself, I wanted to talk about this for the solid waste working group. These were, what I had in mind was metrics for the sustainability, sustainability framework that the city has. So from my reading of it, it looks like per the original time when these work groups were set up last year, it looks like we've kind of covered most of what the Environmental Commission is supposed to look at. But I think it would be useful maybe for all of us to review that. Just go and look at the city's website, the sustainability framework, and think about what other areas we might think about getting engaged in.
I'd like to comment, if I may. I'm going to be a broken record on this. I'd like to remind the commission and frankly residents that a year ago, roughly in February of last year, I presented a topic where I called it Regular Review or Progress Review of Energy and Environmental Commission SMART Goals in Monthly Meetings, with the subtitle, What Gets Measured and Reviewed Gets Done. And we talked about that at some length. I pointed out the fact that the sustainability framework has 7 environmental commission-related goals. And statement that I made was it's important to review all goals and their indicators at least annually, even if they aren't considered a high priority. If an outcome degrades significantly, the goals may need to be reprioritized. And also targets need to reflect priorities, et cetera. I'd like to remind ourselves that we had, as far as I know, 1 review of goals last year, and that was a review of greenhouse gas emissions, which is actually the work of the Energy Commission, not the Environmental Commission. So we went through all of 2019 without reviewing any goals or metrics that relate to outcomes tied to important environmental results or outcomes that we should be looking at. For example, we never had a formal review, although the data is out there, of solid waste metrics. We talked about some of those today. There's diversion rate information out there. It's never been put and discussed in the public domain and presented. We've never had here a review of water quality or watershed. We had a watershed metric review in 2018. It was presented by the Huron River Watershed Council based on input that we gave on trying to develop an index that could be tracked and trended year to year. We haven't had any review of any air quality metrics. It seems to me that if we're serving the city, all of us working, we need to be looking at what are we delivering. And if we're making progress, great. If we're not making progress, why and what do we need to do to get better? Like I said, what gets measured and reviewed gets done. And if you're not doing that consistently, then it's very likely that you're not making progress. And I think solid waste is a great example of that. We haven't had regular reviews of solid waste in any formal way. And our solid waste diversion rate is the same last year as it was in 2012. So I would just remind us of that. And I think we all come here to make a difference. And I would say we don't know, because we haven't been reviewing things, whether or not we're making a difference. And one just last comment on this. In the professional life that I lived, this is a bigger organization with formal processes. I had a performance review every year. I had to go into my performance review every year. By the way, it's not an old-fashioned performance review. This is a performance review to talk about how do we get better results, myself, my organization, in supporting the rest of the organization. So it's not something that's a rap on the hand kind of thing. But going into every one of those, I had to write an accomplishment report. And I think it would be helpful for this group to annually write our own accomplishment report. What did we accomplish? And some of our accomplishments are maybe writing and approving a resolution. That's something, but I would not say that's really significant accomplishments. And I think we should look in the mirror once a year and really judge ourselves and say, how are we doing? And if we're not doing as well as we like, then how do we improve that so that coming here and spending time every month and then in working group meetings, we really think about how do we really provide and deliver value and benefits from the time that we invest. You've heard it before. Sorry.
Anybody else? No, I think I fully concur with John. In fact, we're jumping a little bit ahead, but I was hoping that the agenda for our February meeting was going to consist of exactly this.
Well, I'd be willing to work with others on drafting our accomplishment report. I could put something together and send it out there, and people could add to it, strike, whatever, and then maybe we can review that as an agenda item in our February meeting. And then talk about, most importantly, what do we do the same when we're doing something well, and what do we do differently to improve?
Well, and this should be an ongoing process too. It's not something to wait and do it once a year.
In terms of metrics, though, weren't we supposed to be getting updates from the solid waste staff on these numbers so we can actually measure our success? Because we don't.
Well, the intent would be to invite them to present that where it's appropriate. So we would schedule a meeting where we would say, in whatever month, we want to review the solid waste metrics that are available. We generally know what they are. And then we have a discussion about, what's planned and what, if anything, the Environmental Commission can do to contribute to the achievement of those goals.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, asking for some sort of regular report out rather than inviting them to a particular meeting. Just requiring monthly updates via email or something like that.
I think maybe monthly is going too far. I think quarterly.
Sure.
Let's try for quarterly before we go for monthly.
Yeah, let's try for once before
Yeah. Well, this has already been
I
discussed.
would be happy with annual
Yeah.
to start. And then what we can do is, this would be my suggestion, when we review something for an annual result, then we can discuss if this is going great, then why do we need to spend a lot of time, theirs and ours, on reviewing something quarterly when something's going well? When things are not going well, those are the things you want to review quarterly or whatever it may be, semi-annually, so that you can intervene before you lose a whole year to something going bad.
No, I agree. Once something is established, but I think at the beginning, it's good to have a quarterly process so that you can work out all the details, about what do you think is valuable reporting, what the trends are, things like that. But yeah, hopefully it would eventually become an annual review. This has already been discussed with the city solid waste staff, because, we had that whole saga for years about the solid waste fund. So that's definitely, we have a lot of promises that that's going to happen every 3 months. Creston's already done that over the last year. So hopefully we could all think about this and think about what we can do. And John, were you thinking about just sticking with the sustainability framework as it currently exists?
As a starting point. I mean, we're not even doing that. And frankly, maybe we shouldn't do all of that to begin with. If we just focus on a handful, at least we start and we try the process and we say, even from a process perspective, is this working or not? Rather than agreeing to do all 7 environmental metrics, I would say we do 3 and try it out.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. I mean, the sustainability framework includes quite a lot of things that really aren't the purview of the Environmental Commission. They're more the purview of the Energy Commission.
Yeah.
Or the Transportation Commission.
There are 16 sustainability framework topics, I believe. Originally, there were 30, something in the range of 30-some metrics. And you may recall there was a joint commission. It's now probably 2 years ago since it disbanded, I should say, a working group of the Energy and Environmental Commission that went through those. And I think that's where I got the numbers that I mentioned a little while ago, that there were 7 environmental and 3 Energy Commission related framework goals. And I don't, we proposed some metrics for each of those. But like I said, I think it would be foolish to try to work with all those. Let's take baby steps and see how that works. I mean, some of the big ones relate directly to what we're talking about here today. Solid waste, water and watershed quality. We had that, there's a precedent for that. And then maybe we do something on air quality. And I think that has to be reported federally anyhow. And maybe we just review that data. Or we say we don't have a working group, maybe we don't do that. Maybe it's something related to, I don't know, the natural features group or something like that.
Healthy ecosystems.
Okay. So maybe you could send, does everybody have a copy of that subcommittee that the Energy and Environmental Commission did a couple of years ago about that? Maybe, John, you could distribute that among the commissioners?
It's on
So-
Legistar. I could resend it again, I think. Yep.
Or, okay, just so
Just a
everybody
link
has a
even.
chance to look
Okay.
at it, you know?
Goes in the minutes as a reminder. I'll do that.
Okay. All right. Is there any other comments anybody wants to make about metrics or the commission's role in tracking these metrics and helping set them? Okay. So, reports from committees, other commissions?
Can I make one other comment, if I may, just
Oh.
to emphasize the point? I'll use something outside of our purview, but maybe something that all of us, including residents, can relate to. The city can say, we paved 20 miles or repaved 20 miles of streets. And that was great. We completely met our plan. We said we were going to do 20 miles. We did 20 miles. Well, that's great, but if 30 miles fall below the standard of what we considered a good quality road, then the city accomplished paving 20 miles, but in the meantime, 30 fell into disrepair. And if you do that every year, then you can tout the 20 that you paved, but the 30 that fell into disrepair add up and add up and add up, and that's what you have today. So we have to frame our discussions around, are we really making a positive impact on the bottom line, and not just report on compliance or projects done or something like that. Did we deliver better quality of life and for the residents of Ann Arbor?
All right. Duly noted.
Yep.
So, okay, so let's move on to reports from committees, other commissions, council, and chair. See, Mike, do you want to do parks?
We didn't have a quorum, didn't meet in December.
Okay. Let's see, Shannon's
We'll be
not.
meeting next Tuesday.
Okay. So let's see, Shannon's not here, so she's our planning commission representative. Let's see. Council?
I should do energy briefly.
Oh, yeah, energy, yeah, energy.
Sorry for talking all the time. I think maybe some interesting updates, though. Energy Commission had a report on initial studies and work towards a 25 megawatt solar installation on property that's basically where the Wheeler Center is, and potentially longer-term parts of the landfill. Right now, the landfill is not a priority because it's nesting habitat for a, not endangered, what's the next level down? Threatened species, bird species. So it's city-owned property, but much of it is in Pittsfield Township. And so the city is working with Pittsfield Township and with DTE. The energy would be purchased by Pittsfield Township and the city for municipal operations, potentially also at some point maybe in a community solar kind of thing, but that's not allowed right now. So work needs to be done to advance that. We passed in the Energy Commission a resolution in support of $90,000 being allocated by the city to be able to do that. So if anybody's interested in details, they can go on the city's calendar, Legistar, and look at that presentation.
It was approved.
Ah, excellent. Well done.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Very good. Good progress.
So one thing we were working on was a solar access ordinance, and that's sort of stuck in the mud right now with a lot of legal concerns, so that's sort of been tabled. We're still working on what's called an EV Readiness Ordinance. I've talked about it here, and that's basically now in final form. It's been reviewed with a subset of the Planning Commission and with planning. And the intent is to, Emily, do you know when we meet with planning now? Is it set?
Yeah, we wanted to meet with planning a little earlier, but the earliest we could get in from Brett Leonard was in April.
In April, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And There was a resolution that was proposed on banning new connections, natural gas connections, for new construction in support of the city's climate emergency and movement towards carbon neutrality by 2030. That was tabled for the time being. There was some discussion about what's the impact going to be. There's a fair amount of new construction, but one of the big issues is all the built environment that's already in place. There's some cities that are looking at even banning that entirely, but with a due date. So by 2040 or something like that, all appliances would have to be replaced. There may be other ways of addressing this through permit fees or connection fees. So that was tabled. And then the last thing I think of interest, solar installations. We've been tracking this now for many years. And last year we had by far the best year. So just 2017 and 2018 had been prior than past years before that, but we had roughly 35 permits for residential solar. Last year there was almost 90, I think it was 88, and the number of kilowatts installed went up from roughly 250 kilowatts to almost 900 kilowatts, so a really huge jump. Shows increased awareness, shows prices are coming down, shows that the fact that the property tax repeal is making a difference. The only thing that I would remind people of is that the Energy Commission, talking about what gets measured gets done, and holding a mirror up to our own work, we said we wanted to install 2.3 megawatts per year over 10 years, so between 2015 and 2025. And last year was by far our best, as I mentioned, but we still only installed 900 kilowatts. So we're much better, and hopefully we can see exponential growth, but we still are below our targeted rate. That's it. Thanks.
Oh, I had a question. I mean, the Ann Arbor Public Schools recently passed the millage. Part of the funding would be targeted towards sustainability, such as maybe solar panels and things like that. Are there any plans for how is the Energy Commission going to maybe interact with the Ann Arbor Public Schools?
So I think through the overall A20 initiative, there is a technical advisory committee that's working on projects. We have representation from Ann Arbor Public Schools. On that advisory committee, we have some projects that are specifically targeted or have possibilities, put it that way, for public schools. Right now, public schools really hasn't specifically said exactly this and that and the other is going to be done, and sustainability measures not only includes things like solar, it includes things like improved envelopes of buildings, so meaning more insulation, better ceiling. It includes things like potentially geothermal. So right now, we're working together with the city jointly in this community-wide target, but right now there's not anything specific yet as far as what would be done at what school. There's a broad table of identifying schools and what kind of measures would be taken with some dots, but this is just preliminary, and the public schools have said all along that any final decisions will be based on deeper public engagement and then the more detailed plans.
Okay. One more question. I mean, what about at least half of all the residents of Ann Arbor are either renters or they don't have roofs that are amenable to putting panels on. So is there any progress towards community solar options to provide residents? Or?
There are two packages of energy-related legislation that have been introduced in the Michigan House, co-sponsored by Yusuf Rabi, and one of those includes, it's called the Energy Freedom Package, and one of those three bills directly addresses community solar and would enable community solar to be, projects to be implemented in Michigan. Community solar, for everybody that doesn't know, is basically where an entity would put in a large solar array, and I could buy 10 panels of that, and get the energy produced from those 10 out of the 1,000 or the 10,000. Bob could buy 30, Ann could buy 5, et cetera, or somebody, even a school or a business could buy a large chunk of those. That way you get much, much lower costs and you get the economies of scale. But that's not allowed right now because the utilities have a monopoly supply position. And it was just not simply allowed in Michigan right now.
Yeah, it's illegal.
Yep.
Okay. Let's see, Chair, I don't think I'll say anything at this point.
Do you want to do council?
Sorry,
Council?
council, yeah. Ann, do you have any further information from council?
A couple short updates. At Tuesday night's meeting, the council approved our resolution to add 2 youth members to the Environmental Commission. So we will be going from a 13-member commission to 2 new youth members, up to 15. And the only change we made, there was a lot of discussion about whether ages 14 to 25 was the right age, and we actually moved it up to age 16
Is it minimum?
as the youngest, yes,
16 to 25.
16 to 25. After a lot of discussion and even some input from some high school kids as to whether they felt they'd be ready at 14 or whether 16 was better, and they thought 16 and such, so, yeah. So that was approved, and those folks will have a 1-year term, and I think that'll be coming really quite soon now, that we can start recruiting them. I'll wait to see how that unfolds, but they'll have to apply like a regular commission member and be reviewed and selected. And the Energy Commission will be updating their bylaws next with the similar.
Okay.
So we did that. The food gatherers resolution that the Environmental Commission had passed has gotten slowed down a bit in the attorney's office because there's some complicated issues related to the IRS and public charities and waiving their fee, giving them a fee exemption. So they've been meeting with Eileen Spring from Food Gatherers. They're gonna meet with her again on February 10. But then we expect after February 10, things will go up more quickly, and we'll be on the way to incentivizing food recovery and waste diversion. And so that one's got slowed down, but it's still in progress. And I could answer any questions from folks because so many things have been happening at council. But I did just want to let you all know that our issue of the 57 oaks and the other woodland trees out at 2857 Packard, it's not quite over yet. They have submitted, the trees aren't down yet. They've submitted a signed development agreement, but they have not submitted a permit to actually remove the trees yet. So council gave them permission to move forward with the development because we couldn't prolong the lawsuit. However, council simultaneously, as you may recall, gave permission to pursue that Packard Road for affordable housing. So they said yes and no both at the same night. So Jennifer Hall did an analysis, and unfortunately, because that 2857 down by Cobblestone Farms is not considered walkable by the low-income housing tax credit system, it didn't score well for the Housing Commission to leverage it. So Jennifer Hall sadly had to give it a lukewarm to low response for affordable housing. But I'm still working with Howard Lazarus and others, and you, if you have further suggestions, to try to piece together sources of funding. So there could be, Shannon Gibb Randall knows Jennifer Hall, and I want to thank Shannon if she was here tonight, because she stepped in and tried to, and successfully explained to Jennifer Hall how you could have a narrow driveway through the trees and then build housing on the back of the lot. So we're working on piecing together a little bit of affordable housing and then other sources of funding, such as we know Cobblestone Farms is overflowed and very successful. So this being a nearly adjacent property, neighboring property, could be part of that system. And then also the watershed, Mallett's Creek, as the county commissioners pointed out, is DE and F for quality. And so the part that's concerning people is that we just don't know what the impact is if we remove 8 acres of urban forest and woodland. We don't know, we don't know, and so nobody wants to look back and say, what were we thinking? To take that down and take down all those trees, and of course, all the wildlife and all the unknowns of what that is actually providing, and the critical root zones and all. And then, so we're piecing together sources of income. One other source, of course, as we know, is the $6 million accumulated in the Greenbelt funds for purchases within the city. And another source of funding is potentially the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund. And they've just updated their criteria to weigh natural resource conservation and urban area recreation. So we're still working on all those pieces, and mainly I wanted to let you all know that if you have any second thoughts or ideas that would help in this matter, please let me know.
Right, thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
I got a question for Ann. When are we going to read the Ann Arbor News where you're on a hunger streak, a hunger strike, chained up in the trees, not letting them cut them down? Are we going to read that someday?
Not me personally.
You don't have to answer that.
Yeah, not me personally, but there are some residents who are thinking that.
Yeah, it's been done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, report from staff.
Great. So the biggest news, not unsurprisingly, is the A20 work. We've been moving very, very fast on that. We've held over 30 events with our partner organizations, and we have 5 in the next week alone. We've had internal staff meetings with the fire department management team, the safety unit, clerk's office, attorney's office, and we're going to also be talking with the IT department about how to get them involved in A20. We have 4 technical advisory committees for each sector, and they are currently meeting for the 3rd time. They actually have all met and are going through and prioritizing some ideas that came from the ideation phase. For partners, we've added Common Cycle, Ann Arbor Main Street Association, NRDC, National Resources Defense Council, Earth Sciences, Pesticide Free Ann Arbor, and Slow Food Huron. Other things we've been doing.
How many are we up to now? You know, roughly?
Like 50, 55 or higher.
I think it's actually 75 or 80 now. I think
It's
Missy's
really
saying that.
impressive, yeah.
Okay.
We wrapped up the first public engagement survey, and we shared some TAC evaluations. We launched a second public engagement survey, which can be found on a20.org, and that focuses on gathering input on what potential actions the public supports, as well as talking about funding mechanisms. There's going to be a really important town hall on February 22nd at Pioneer High School from 12 to 5. It's open to everybody, and that's a really good time to come and see the actions that will be recommended, and you'll get to put together your own carbon reduction budget. And we created materials to help with engagement, and there's a meeting in a box for residents to gather feedback and fact sheets. Other things include the sustainability forums for this year are going to be centered on A20, not unsurprisingly. On Thursday, January 30th at 7 p.m. at the Downtown Branch Library, we're going to talk about achieving carbon neutrality in the energy sector. And then monthly forums following that will cover carbon neutrality in the transportation sector, resource sector, and adaptation and resiliency sector. That's my report.
All right, thank you. So let's see, So the next item on the agenda is items for the next agenda in February. So we've already heard about a metrics discussion and a goals discussion and a performance review over the last year.
An accomplishments review, maybe.
Well, yeah,
Yep.
an accomplishments review. Yeah, let's not call it performance review, an accomplishments review. Let's see, does the staff have anything that they'd like to have discussed at the February meeting?
I think you and I've talked about stuff, but I don't have it
Yeah.
at the tip of my fingers.
Yeah. And another outreach, I've talked to people at the Huron River Watershed Council and everything about getting an updated report on the health of the watershed and about different issues that are emerging, such as microplastics in the Huron River. So they are actually just completing their a review update, and it will be available by March. So I'm thinking maybe we'll have water and air quality topic for the March meeting. Yeah. Okay. So we've got something to think about for the next couple of months. In terms of action points, this is something we've never done, but I think just if John could remember to distribute that, the metrics thing for people to review before the February meeting, I think that would be a good thing. Are there any other suggestions for topics for the February meeting or going forward? Okay. So, so the next scheduled meeting is February 27th, 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Oh, public commentary?
I'm sorry, oh my God, I forgot about page 2. So this is the second public commentary period for the meeting. Anybody who wishes to speak, come up to the microphone and just say your name.
My name's Eddie Smith. I'm a resident of Ann Arbor, and I want to start out by saying how much I really respect this commission and the mission you serve. I think it's incredible, and it's great to listen to the discussion and the debate. I also want, and I mean, it's 9 p.m. and everyone's here away from their homes, away from their families, serving the public's interests on one of the most important topics, which is environmental sustainability for the city. It's phenomenal. I also want to say I really respect high ethical standards and practices. Recusing oneself from voting on a matter where there's a conflict of interest between the public's interests and one's private interests is the right way we should be doing it in Ann Arbor. It's great. It really is. But I want to go further down that vein and offer a critique to this commission. If a matter is inappropriate to vote on, it's certainly also inappropriate to discuss. You shouldn't be debating it. You shouldn't be commenting on it. You shouldn't be recommending that the vote be postponed. You shouldn't be saying the language is inappropriate. You shouldn't be doing any of these things that happen here tonight. Because if it's inappropriate to cast a vote on that matter, it's also inappropriate to influence the policy recommendation in any other matter. It's just another mechanism of trying to affect policy. And citizens of Ann Arbor have high ethical standards from our government. They deserve it, and I know this commission probably views it the same way. So I think an issue is that the rules that are codified are incredibly gray on this matter. They say that city council and its appointed commissions must recuse themselves from voting on issues that are conflict of interest, but it doesn't explain what voting means, right? There's no definition of voting. Is voting simply just casting your vote at the end, or does it include discussing the topics, recommending language changes, all the things that happen here tonight between the second motion to consider the issue and the actual vote? So I am, again, with the highest respect coming forward here and with positive intent and looking to the future, but I would encourage all the members of the commission to interpret voting with the highest ethical standard, interpret voting meaning engaging in any way whatsoever on influencing policy, including discussing it, making recommendations, debating, anything like that. And then I would encourage the chair of the commission to interpret it the same way, to rescind the floor from anyone who makes a mistake, and to make sure that we are delivering the highest standard of ethics we can. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Anybody else wish to make a public comment?
Just thank you, all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The most important issues.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks for being here. So is there a motion to adjourn?
Don't need one. You can adjourn the meeting.
All right, I'll adjourn it. All right. The time is 8:55.